the large bird club for Wake County. It meets during normal times, it meets at the Nature Center Museum down on Jones Street. And you can find all about us at wakeaudubon.org. What I'm going to show you is the common birds of Wake County. If you're looking out your window, and we've all been doing that the last, 10 months, you're likely to see a bunch of these birds. The emphasis would be, and the assignment would be, look in the slideshow as we go along, and we're going to move pretty rapidly, and find out different ways that birds help us or ways that we can help the birds. Are you ready to begin? All right, you see a bird, and it's dark gray back and a brick red breasts, and it has really distinctive calls. Anybody know what bird it is?
Robin.
There you go. They're a very common bird found often standing upright on lawns because they feed on lawns. And knowing that, you should know that they're sensitive to chemicals that you use on your lawn. So use what you need to use, but don't overuse because it does affect American robins. A small gray bird with a tufted crest. And it says, Peter, Peter, Peter. It's a very vocal bird in your backyard, comes to the feeders.
Tufted
waxwing.
All right, this is the literate group, the tufted titmouse. It readily uses sunflower seeds, and it is important that you keep your feeders clean because it protects them from disease. A lot of times it's disease that they get from each other. Birds need to socially distance themselves because, for example, conjunctivitis is a disease that will affect birds. And if it's rubbed off on a post or on a feeding station, other birds can get it. And so regularly changing the seed so it's not moldy and cleaning the feeder just with water and wiping it off will do wonders to keep the feeders clean. A little black cap with a white cheek. And it says, Phoebe, Chickadee. The Carolina chickadee. Up in the mountains in Carolina, you'll more likely find black-capped chickadees. They're often found in mixed flocks with tufted titmice. They kind of help each other look out for predators. And it has been proven that bird feeders in especially hard winters have helped chickadees survive. Two birds. One is slim gray with white wing bars. The other one's slate gray with a black cap and a chestnut vent. They share something in common. Anybody know these birds?
The meanest bird on earth.
Yes. The northern mockingbird and the gray catbird. What they have in common is they both imitate other sounds, and they'll eat a lot of insects and they'll nest in the thick bushes near your home. There is a third mimic, by the way, but the two, well, actually, I'm sorry, up north, the other one isn't as common, but down here, they're common. Two different birds here.
Male and female cardinals.
Yep, there you go. Now, does anybody have an idea why the bird that is female is usually drabber?
Camouflage.
Yes, and they have to stay on the nest. They have really interesting calls, and they'll sing from branches near your home if you leave some dead branches. They really love dead branches to get out and sing. And one of the interesting things is very few females sing, but the female cardinal does. Crested bird, blue wings, black necklace.
My favorite.
Says Jay or Keetle Keetle.
The blue jay.
A blue jay. Okay. This is a good group. They move in social groups. They're very alert to your presence. Northern migrants will replace our local birds, and our local birds will go south. Just think of a large shift from north to south. And they really love peanuts if you leave them in the shell. Just leave them out and they'll gobble them up. A blue back and head with an orange breast.
The bluebird.
Eastern bluebird. It's a really pretty bird, and they're very common. If you see a smallish bird on a telephone line, it's likely to be an eastern bluebird. They can lay up to 3 clutches, and this is one of the birds that can use a nest box, and it's particularly one that's specifically designed for them. If you do a 1/2 inch hole in the box that you build, you'll get a bluebird, but its competitor that's an exotic that's in this area called starlings can't get in. They're a little bit too big. Now, because it's a 1/2 inch big, other birds might use it, but what we're trying to do is exclude the starling that will actually kill the bluebirds and take over the nest. There's a lot of nest boxes a lot of birds that take nest boxes. Ah, 2 small birds that like to work along on the bark of the tree. The first one is a black cap and a white face and chest. The other one is smaller with a brown cap. The second one sounds like a squeaky toy, just like you're squeezing a little rubber ducky. And the first one has a wah, wah, wah sound.
Is that a finch?
That's a good guess. That's a good guess, but the finch's bill would be bigger because it cracks seeds, and these are insect eaters. They're brown-headed and white-breasted nuthatches. They like to feed on insects found hiding on the bark of a tree, and they'll readily use a nest box if you put it out. In fact, we being Audubon have put out 10,000 brown-headed nuthatch boxes. If you hear that squeaky sound, look for the pine trees, because those pine trees, they're very specific to pines. They love them. And if you keep pines in your neighborhood, you'll have nuthatches for sure. Small black and white woodpecker makes a pick call and a lot of whinny sounds. It's a downy woodpecker. And because it has downy-like feathers around its bill. They're quite similar to a hairy woodpecker, but they're not often found at feeders. If you see what you say, good grief, that's a big downy woodpecker, look at the bill. If the bill is about as big as in distance of the head, and it doesn't have those little black spots on the outer tail feathers, it'd be a hairy woodpecker. And they climb trees using their stiff feathers, and they drill for insects. Here's 2 more woodpeckers. I like to have a nickel for every time somebody said, I saw a red-headed woodpecker. And I said, did it have a completely red head, or did it have a red toupee? And they'll say red toupee. And I go, well, you saw a red-bellied woodpecker. And they say, oh, it didn't have a red belly. And I said, well, that's hard to see. And you have to remember that they name birds based on holding it in their hand. They didn't do it from a distance. You can actually tell these 2 birds apart by their call. One's much harsher, and the other one sounds more like a rattle. And you ever wonder how they can be drilling into a tree without eventually losing brain cells? They actually have shock absorbers that help them survive. In addition, this is something to think about in your property or in your neighborhood. If you have an old, dead standing tree, and it's not going to threaten houses or property or anybody, leave it up, because I like to call them bird condos. This is a fairly large woodpecker. The thing that'll really make it stand out is that it has a white rump patch and it has yellow shafted feathers on the wing. And it goes wick, 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 or keer. It is, anybody?
Is it a flicker?
It is a flicker. This is a good group. I have groups that don't know the robin, which tells you something. The Eastern have yellow shafts on their wing. The Westerns have red shafted. They feed on ants on the ground. So if you ever see a woodpecker on the ground walking around, it's almost undoubtedly a northern flicker. And once again, if you leave a dead snag up, flickers will often sing from it, and they'll also build a cavity in it. And you know, the woodpecker cavities are kind of important, because not only do woodpeckers use it, but they often won't use it again. And other birds that are cavity nesters will use the hole that they couldn't excavate themselves. Ah, now we're into the hawks. Any of you particularly interested in hawks?
I love hawks.
These are the two hawks that you'll see in this area. The first one's medium size with black and white bands that are pretty broad and easy to see, a lot of checkerboarding, black and white checkerboarding on the wing, and red shoulders. The other one, if you look at it, you can faintly see a red tail, and on the front shoulder leading edge of the wing called the patagium, you can see that it's dark, and their call is different. If you ever have a hawk in your neighborhood and it won't shut up, it's a red-shouldered hawk. They are very noisy, and wait until the young fledge and they're begging for food on top of your house. The red-tailed hawk, on the other hand, has a raspy scream, and I was hiking Hemlock Bluff yesterday in Cary, and I stopped because I could hear what I thought was a red-shouldered hawk, but then it was way too thin and raspy, and it was that red-tailed hawk, and it was moving around. I never did see it, but I knew it was there. Red shoulders often nest in communities. Red tails often like open country with large trees. And remember, hawks are really good at controlling the rodent and snake populations. Oh, what are these guys?
Turkey buzzard.
Turkey buzzard, yeah. Yeah, in fact, we like to call them vultures, partly because that's their name, but buzzards is also another name for hawk in Europe. And if you're in Europe and you say buzzard, they're going to look for a hawk. Look at the difference between the two. Do you see one is overall brown with a reddish head? The other one is black with a black head? That's an easy way to tell them apart. Turkey vultures lean over like a turkey. Black vultures are very dark. But the funny thing about a black vulture is when they're flying, the outer feathers, the really big ones at the end of the wing, are white. If you're ever in an old abandoned house and all of a sudden you hear, first, after you collect yourself, you'll realize that there's probably a broken window, and a vulture has found a way to come in and is raising their young in there. You do want to get away from them for a variety of reasons, most notably that their big defense is to throw up on you. Don't forget, vultures are very important in that they remove dead and dying animals, reducing disease. Roger Tory Peterson, one of the more famous bird watchers, noticed he did an experiment where he took a dead animal that he roadkill and he put it under a tarp, and the turkey vultures started circling over it and came down within 1 hour. Now, they couldn't see it, but they could smell it. Most birds don't have a sense of smell, but turkey vultures, for obvious reasons, do. Okay, now notice somebody said finch before. Look at the finch bill, made for cracking seeds. The first one's reddish with dark streaks, and the second one's bright yellow with a black cap.
Purple.
The first one always has the word "weir" in it, along with the song. And the second one, when he sings, he says, "Potato chip, potato chip." These are the house finch and the American goldfinch. Really nice birds. Right now, by the way, if you see a house finch that has no dark streaking and it's overall kind of like dipped in raspberry juice, you're looking at a bird that is irregularly present during the winter called the purple finch. And there's a bunch of them this year, along with pine siskins, red-breasted nuthatches, and snowy owls. They don't often come down, but when they do, birders get in their cars and go to see them. And this is one of those years, which is interesting because it's one of those years we're not supposed to go get in our car. House finches, you might be interested to know, were introduced from the Southwest US, and they quickly found their own niche in the Eastern Seaboard. I used to call them, when I was a kid, I used to call them Hollywood finches because they were common in Hollywood. And every once in a while, I'll have somebody say, "Where did my goldfinches go in the winter? And what are these drab birds that are now at my feet are kind of a brown olive color?" And I go, "Those are goldfinches." And they go, "Well, they're not gold." And I go, "Well, they're not gold in the winter." This is something you should know. Outdoor cats will sometimes catch these birds and eat them, or just kill them. We think that outdoor cats are responsible for up to 1 billion birds a year being killed by an animal that's really not supposed to be out there hunting. It's particularly devastating to birds that nest on or near the ground, like the wood thrush. Huh, you must know what this bird is.
Crow.
Crows. Did you know there's two kinds of crows?
Nope.
They're American crow and a fish crow. The American crow is on top, the fish crow is on the bottom. And most of you would look and say, they look the same. And they do, really. The fish crow tends to be a little smaller, but it's their voice that helps you identify the difference between the two birds. What does an American crow say? Let's hear it. Caw, caw, caw. Yeah. But if you ask a fish crow, if he's an American crow, he says, uh-uh, uh-uh. He has an R sound in his call. So the next time you see a crow and it has an R sound, particularly if he says, that's a fish crow. And here you'll run into them regularly. You'll find more fish crows during the summer, but I know I was over at Harris Lake last week and I heard, so I know there were some fish crows there.
Larry, quick question for you.
Sure.
Does it seem like crows are smarter birds? I mean,
Yeah.
they seem to be a lot more communal and they play and it just seems like there's something more going on there than other birds.
Yeah, definitely. One of the more intelligent birds out there. And a close relative of the crow, the blue jay, it's also a corvid. It is also really smart. Now, sometimes you have to analyze, is it human smart or just plain bird smart? And I think it's a combination, but they did a study up in New York State where they found a dead crow and they had a man go out with a costume and wearing particular clothes. In other words, he was wearing a fake mask and he walked around holding the dead crow and then laid it down in view of a whole bunch of crows. And the next day he came out without a dead crow, and the crows really didn't like him. They attacked him. They made a lot of noise. They recognized who it was. And he went out not disguised and they didn't bother him. So it was specifically, they knew who he was. And crows have adapted very well to living near humans or right near humans. There's a lot of instances where you say, like a friend of mine owns farmland and he had a lot of trouble with crows, bothering his corn. So he'd hire a hunter to, get the crows away, kill a couple of them. And the hunter would never get more than one of them. If he shot him once, they shot one, all the rest of them knew how to stay out of rifle range after that. And the farmer was okay with it because it was only about 11 acres. So the crows were pretty well staying out of his cornfield. And he even made a scarecrow dressed like the hunter. Does everybody know what this is?
Ruby-throated hummingbird.
Yeah. If you're east of the Mississippi, the common bird that's a hummingbird is the ruby-throated. But this time of year, it's not ruby-throated. There are a few that winter, particularly out toward the coast. Most of them, 99% of them go south. But there are some birds that go on walkabout this time of year that are hummingbirds, and particularly rufous hummingbirds, which is a bigger hummingbird. And like it says, it's kind of reddish. And you'll find them at feeders now. In fact, there was a bird walk at Fletcher Park last week where very clearly a rufous hummingbird came and looked at them. And they were surprised because first, you don't expect to see a hummingbird. And second, you don't expect to see one that's from the West Coast, but it happens. Ruby-throated hummingbird. And don't forget, they also eat a lot of arthropods, particularly when they're nesting, because birds need protein in order to grow quickly. And that's why an awful lot of birds that don't eat seeds, don't eat insects normally, start eating insects to feed their young to let them grow quickly. And don't forget, it's important to clean the feeders and change the water regularly, particularly here in North Carolina, where it's hot and humid all the way through from May to what, September? And that makes mold grow on it more quickly. Once again, just rinse it off, brush it off, let it dry, and put it back together. I really recommend that you don't use chemicals if you don't have to. If you do, just really rinse it and let it dry for a day. Anybody?
Turtle dove.
Very good, turtle dove, but this one goes boo hoo hoo hoo. It's a mourning dove.
Gotcha.
Okay. I like to have a nickel for every kid when I was teaching would come and say, I heard a hawk. I mean, I heard an owl. It was going boo hoo hoo hoo. And I go, oh, that was really good, but it's not an owl. They make the worst nest of any bird I've ever seen that actually make a nest. And they'll nest several times a year. And this is the bird that reproduces so prolifically that limited hunting seasons um, are okay, and the population will stay steady from year to year, even with hunting. Ah, this is a bird that you often don't see except flying. And they emit a very rapid chittering call, and they nest in chimneys. Anybody? Chimney Swift, huh? They've adapted to roosting in open chimneys instead of large hollow trees, which are less common now because of our logging practices. And if you leave the cap off your chimney during breeding season, they'll attract swifts to use it. Only one pair. If you go over to Prairie Ridge Eco Station, you'll see a great big square, probably, I don't know, 60 feet high chimney. It's a great big one, all by itself, never been attached to a building. Wake Audubon, through a series of grants, built it for the roosting chimney swifts that come down in the fall. And we're hoping that eventually tens of thousands of them will use it as a roost site on their way south. I don't know if you can hear the audio in here, but there's a bird singing outside my window right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's the top bird. And it's saying tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. The other one has a really long jumble of notes. It's the Carolina wren and the house wren. Both prefer to nest in cavities. And if you have a loose stick pile in your yard or in the forest near your house, it'll attract wrens. One of their scientific names is troglodyte. They're like cave dwellers. That's how I'd like to nest. In addition, if any of you have like a portico or a porch that's open to the air, and something like a brown blob shows up in a corner at night and leaves before early light, you might get a wintering, roosting Carolina wren. And the first time you see it, you go, is that like a fat mouse or something? But it's actually the wren. This is the bird that's here now and will be gone by March. It's dark-eyed Juncos. And they're fall migrants, sometimes called snowbirds. And climate change is impacting their migration patterns because they really do respond to temperature for movement. And they also look at the photoperiodism of the day, the length of the day. And they're starting to move at times where they arrive at a time that's not working for them. Now this is a group, there's a lot of these around right now. In fact, when I go on a bird walk this morning, this is going to be the dominant birds. What group of birds would this be? Their song, that's the top one, and white-throated sparrows. White-throated sparrows, by the way, have a really neat call, and you'll start hearing it right about now because they start practicing their song before they move up to Canada for nesting. They go like this. Let me see if I can whistle it. Poor for Sam Peabody, Peabody, Peabody. The Canadians like to say, oh, Canada, Canada, Canada. And hey, we're not going to be political here, okay? Um, they love tight hedgerows of berries and seed plants to attract them. And places where they put out those rows, particularly farms that use it as a windbreak, it is a bonanza for these kinds of birds. If you are coming near a bramble and you see movement of birds, stop. And you'll embarrass your friends. I embarrass my wife every time I do it. But go like this, go, and these birds will pop up to see what bird is out there. And don't do it all the time, but do it. And you'll find out that what you thought were 5 birds is probably 20 white-throated sparrows. Now we're getting into summertime because these are birds that swallow their food in the air. Notice the first one has a chestnut face and a dark back and a forked tail. The other one is blue-green and very white. These are barn and tree swallows. They feed on insects on the wing, and they can remove a lot of insects daily near your home. So that if you happen to have a lot of barn swallows from an old barn or some place that's suitable, a bridge, by the way, they do a lot of bridge nesting. They make a mud cup nest. They'll be like your own bug zapper. And you're just contributing to what you'd like to have happen, and that's less mosquitoes eating you. I like this bird, and it's a very aggressive bird. It's the eastern kingbird, and it's has a buzzy sound like zee, 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 zee. And they prefer to eat insects, and they eat a lot of bees. But if you have a lot of insecticide in the environment, those flycatchers will eat it, and it reduces kingbird populations, partly because they can't find the insects. And then if they do get them and they have some of the insecticide in it, it gets concentrated in the eastern kingbird. This is that third mimic. It's larger than robin, bright red-brown, heavy streaking, and it can imitate things, but it's more of a harsh sound than a mockingbird. And it uses about the same habitat. This is anybody? Brown thrasher. Isn't that nice? It's a pretty big bird. Often seen flying from bushes. They like cracked corn and suet. And if you provide cover, water, and food, it encourages this bird to nest in your community. And you'll be surprised how close they nest to you. I had one in a little Lyropia bush, that Loropetalum bush, that was like, I could have petted it if I knew it was there, and I wouldn't have petted it. But a really nice bird. This is a bird that sings, drink your tea, or gweek, gweek. It is an eastern towhee. Used to be called rufous-sided towhee, and you can see the rufous side. Can you tell which one's the male? Well, it says it in there. But you notice that it's slightly duller. That's the female, and the male is really bright. They often like to scratch through the leaf litter. And if you allow leaves to collect in a part of your lawn, this helps towhees to find their food. Have you noticed that there's been some advertisement lately about let the leaves lie? Don't do all this removal, your area. Well, I understand that you want to keep leaves off your lawn because it'll kill your lawn. But if you could, like I'm lucky in that my backyard is a small lawn and then a large forest. So all I do is get my leaf blower out and blow the leaves right into the forest. There are a lot of insects in there, and the towhee depends on those leaf litter to find food. This is a bird that is one of the flycatchers that'll stay around during the winter, and it says, Phoebe. It's an eastern phoebe. It has a habit of bobbing its tail. It nests on ledges on buildings near people. And if you encourage a phoebe to nest near your house, it also provides you a great insect eater. And if you have kids or grandkids, they really would like to see this bird at a distance and going through its mating cycle and raising its young. This is a surprise when I moved here. This is a warbler that'll come to a feeder. Hardly any warbler, being insect eaters, will ever come to a feeder, but this one will. It's the pine warbler, and its trill is like a chipping sparrow, but more musical. And by February, you'll start to hear them in the forest starting to sing because they don't leave. They actually stay around in North Carolina during the entire year. And they, along with the yellow rump warblers, are the common warblers this time of year. If you maintain a pine forest, it attracts pine warblers. Pine warblers aren't named pine because they first saw them in a pine. It's because they really depend on the pine forest community for their livelihood. Now, here are the three that don't belong here, and they're exotic and they're considered pests because they compete for a niche that a native bird would be part of. The starling, the pigeon, and the house sparrow. When you were in Botswana, did you notice that there were a lot of different kinds of sparrows? One of them is the house sparrow because it's native to Africa. It came over on some livestock shipping that had hay and seeds, and once it got here, it spread tremendously. It is also a competitor for eastern bluebird nesting sites. And some people, I'm one of them, if a house sparrow takes over my bluebird box, I'll go and remove their nest. I don't kill them, but I remove their nest and they make another nest. I remove that nest and they go, I give up. And then a bluebird will take over. To give credit, these three people provided all the slides for this talk: Bob Overfelter, Sam Upchurch, and Kevin Kennedy. And neither one of them is that picture right there. I mean, they're a bird photographer. They're not a bird. Now, the first thing I would like to do is I'm going to go back to that first slide. I showed you a whole lot of birds around the neighborhood. And I bet a lot of you are saying, I've seen most of those birds around my house or around my community. What are some things that birds do for us?
Eat insects.
Yes.
I'm out.
All right. How about we just enjoy them?
Yeah.
Now, what are some things that we could do around our house that would help birds survive?
Use less pesticides.
Yeah. And like I know that we do need to treat around our house for termites and ants because this is North Carolina. But you could talk to, if you're having somebody do it, say, would you put out just enough, don't overdo it? It would make a difference. What else other than pesticides?
Clean feeders, I suppose.
Clean your feeders. If you're going to feed, you have a responsibility to make sure it's positive, not negative for the birds. If it rains, check to the seeds haven't clumped and gotten moldy. If it's a nectar feeder, change the sugar water on a regular basis.
Larry, quick question for you about the
Sure.
birds and the water feeders.
Yes.
We usually take ours in October, November-ish, because we don't want to keep a hummingbird here when things get cold. Is that something we created, or is that a thing?
It's not a thing.
Okay.
And it's understandable because when you see a hummingbird and it's colder weather, you go, oh, I kept them here. The only instance I know of a hummingbird actually being kept during the winter, partly because of a feeder, was a lady that saw it in the winter in Connecticut, by the way. And she then lured the hummingbird into her sunroom, with windows and all. And then she kept it there all the way through the winter. She wouldn't let it back out. And the truth is, hummingbirds have enough sense to leave when they need to leave. It's not just food supply. It's also the length of the day, the temperature. And hummingbirds run at such a high rate metabolism that they would have a hard time in colder weather. But a larger hummingbird, like a rufous, is more able to go to areas where it doesn't get to be below freezing for a long period of time, that they have a way of doing it. In fact, if you find a hummingbird in colder weather, you'll find it in a torpor. It'll actually just kind of, you say, oh, what is it, dead? No, it's just not moving because it can't until it gets its body temperature up. That was a good question. And the neat thing about leaving a feeder up is you'll get those rare hummingbirds to show up in your neighborhood that you would not normally see.
So would you take it down at some point, like December, or leave it up year round?
Well, when I was in Maryland, I had one that was still at the feeder on Thanksgiving, and it was a late Thanksgiving that year.
Okay.
And about 2 or 3 days later, it got cold and I didn't see the hummingbird, so I took the feeder in.
Gotcha.
So
there are some people, by the way, that'll put a heat lamp out at the hummingbird feeder. There's a lady that has a house in Swan Quarter that's an expert at hummingbirds and actually comes around this time of year to feeders. There was one in Apex recently that has an Anna's hummingbird, which is really rare. And she recaptured the same bird from several years. So you get those exotic hummingbirds this time of year.
we have really small dogs, and right now we have a puppy that's about 5 pounds. We also have a hawk that hangs around our neighborhood. Do I have to be concerned?
I don't think so. There's always the off chance that something as large as an eagle may be coming by and see a little chihuahua and say, oh, lunch. But that is a rare instance. No, I don't think you have to worry. The worry would be cats. Cats will attack fairly large birds that are unwary.
We somebody in our general area captured a picture of a wildcat. I've lost what's the name of that wildcat? A bobcat, a huge bobcat in their trail camera. Lives close by somewhere.
Yeah. I often think that you'd be surprised what's in your backyard if you put a trail camera out. I have floodlights that come on sensitive to movement after dark. And like last night, the one at the back porch went off and I go, well, it's either a rabbit, a deer, or a coyote. We don't often get too many raccoons around my house. I don't know why, because they're pretty common. Yeah. Once again, I would like to put the advertisement out that Wake Audubon is a really good group to be part of. We participate in scientific studies. Like next week, a birding friend of mine and I are doing our, I don't know how many years we've been doing it, but we go down to Harris Lake and at 12 different spots for 5 minutes apiece, we record every bird we see and hear in that time and then report it to Cornell University. And they're using it to see about population shifts, particularly when it comes to brown-headed, white-breasted, and red-breasted nuthatches. Also eastern bluebirds they're interested in. And it's just to see as the climate changes, how's that affect birds? And one of the ways to do that is to get a lot of data. We also do environmental projects. We speak at a lot of different environmental fairs. We obviously speak to groups like the Rotary Club. And we're also, when we're back to normal, we do a lot of talks at the regional libraries. I know I've done one down at the library right next to City Hall in Nightdale. In fact, a little piece of trivia is my son is the principal at Lockhart Elementary. So if you ever see him, say, hey, I know your dad. That'll bug him.
Larry, I have a question. Thank you.
Sure.
I've learned a lot because I do love birds and nature, but obviously I don't know as much as I probably should as studying. But I was curious, are there hawks that look similar to eagles around? Because I've seen two in the last month. I saw one in Nightdale and then one near the Briar Creek area. And I'm like, that can't be an eagle. But it did have like a white head. The wingspan wasn't, because I've seen eagles in Alaska, wasn't as wide, but I was just curious. I'm like, is this an eagle or what is it?
Yeah. Well, eagles are common in Wake County. I mean, if you want to get your fill of seeing eagles, and I heard what you said, if you ever want to see a whole bunch of eagles, and you could do it right now, is go down to Jordan Dam at Jordan Lake and
Mhm.
go down to the visitor parking lot. And I guarantee you, you'll see a dozen eagles down there. And you'll see them
Okay.
all different plumage too.
Okay. So I've not lost my mind. Okay.
Yeah, and remember
Well,
that
known that one anyway.
it takes bald eagles 4 to 5 years to look like a bald eagle.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there are some other birds that are pretty big. The one that we're always looking for that's also an eagle is the golden eagle. And you'd have to, well, the easy way to tell in the air is when it has its wings out, does it have a white patch right where the palm would be?
Mm-hmm.
And does it have a white base to the tail? If it does, it's a golden eagle. And
Okay.
they're real impressive birds. In fact, they're bigger than bald eagles, but they're much more common out west and they're really spread apart. But yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Yeah. See, I lived along the Chesapeake Bay and we don't go gaga for eagles anymore because there are so many. But
Okay.
there's a good one in that DDT almost wiped them out of the continental United States. That the only place that there were still a significant number of them was Alaska. And it's our symbol. But when we started getting DDT out of the system, and it took a while, their numbers came back quickly. In fact, I was reading an article yesterday about double-crested cormorants, kind of a long-necked duck-like bird, that there's a whole lot of them right now, and they're worried about its impact on the fisheries. And the article went on to explain that double-crested cormorants and bald eagles almost disappeared because of DDT. But when we got rid of DDT and their numbers went back, all of a sudden people are saying, why are there so many double-crested cormorants? And the answer would be, well, before we started killing them, there were a lot of double-crested cormorants. And they're not the cutest bird. So fishermen can actually lobby to get double-crested cormorants actually killed in numbers. And I'm not going into should we or shouldn't we, because fishermen got to live, but so do double-crested cormorants.
Larry, quick question
Yes.
on ospreys. How can you tell the difference between an osprey and like the golden eagle or, an eagle?
That's a good question. Ospreys are in their own group, and that helps you with the way you look at them in the air. If you look at a bird that has a whitish head, of course, he has a black smear across his eye.
Okay.
But the easy way to tell is that when he flies, he has what we say elbows that stick out toward the front.
Okay.
He doesn't have a flat wingspan unless he's just soaring. And it makes it easy to tell them apart. They're smaller, noticeably smaller, and they're almost exclusively found around water. They're not near as common here as in like a large bay, like out toward the coast. But you'll still find them. And I particularly like them. When I was in Maryland, I used to go out with a guy that was banding osprey chicks. And it was always a riot because even as babies, they have formidable talons. So you really needed to hold that bird just right, or you're going to pay for it.
Down in
And they
Charleston.
involved a boat and a ladder. And you don't usually put those
Charleston
two
and Hilton Head.
together, but we did. What was your question?
Sometime about 5 years ago, we were down near Charleston, in between Charleston and Hilton Head, and there was like a road sign, like a highway sign, and I think it was an osprey had built a nest in there, and it was as big as a small car, and it, all kinds of sticks, and it was huge, and it
Yeah.
was in the highway sign, like one of those overpass signs, and it took up a good piece of it, and I was surprised they hadn't torn it down, but I could see it would mess a bunch of people up or upset some people.
Yeah, yeah. In the Chesapeake Bay, the channel markers, they were building on the channel markers. And since they didn't really want to discourage osprey populations, what they started doing was making a platform above the buoy marker. And it worked out just fine because they'd rather have a nice flat with a little bit of a raised side. It's easier to build their nest. Yeah, I really like ospreys. By the way, that's one of the birds, if you travel the world to see birds, you'll run into ospreys in every continent but,
Australia.
oh, no, I saw them in Australia. It's too cold for this place.
Oh, Antarctica.
Yeah, Antarctica. If you go to Antarctica, by the way, and I do recommend it, by the way, because it's really, really, I would say cool, but it's really cold. Is there's nothing like standing in a rookery of 100,000 king penguins. It's something you really should do. But you got to have a lot of warm clothes, and you got to put up with a 20-day cruise on the worst seas you'll ever see. If you get seasick evening, I think you would die on that trip. But it's unbelievably a great place. I've never been to a wilder place in my world in my life. It's very nice to talk to you all, and I appreciate the time because I know you have busy lives. I set out 3 different ways to remind myself that you were talking at 7 o'clock in the morning, not 7 o'clock in the evening.